Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Defense Department is providing little guidance on how firms are expected to comply with a series of restrictions aimed at severing ties with companies the Pentagon says support Beijing's military. A new class deviation the department recently issued significantly broadens the definition of Chinese military company, but it's unclear how exactly it impacts defense contractors. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis spoke with Tracye Howard, government contracts partner at Wiley Rein, to learn more.
Under the terms of the NDAA, these prohibitions took effect on June 30th, and we had been waiting for regulatory implementation to come out, and it seemed like that might not happen before June 30th, and then DoD ended up issuing this class deviation to revise the DFARS and implement the regulations. They were issued on June 29th and took effect immediately. So there was no opportunity for notice or public comment on the rules before they were announced or took effect.
Now we have these restrictions in place, but the Defense Department hasn't issued a DFARS rule telling contractors how exactly they need to comply. So Section 851 prohibits DoD from working with companies that retain lobbyists representing firms on the Pentagon's blacklist. And then we have Section 851 that prohibits DoD from contracting with companies that enter into contracts purchasing technology, goods, or services from those firms. So now Congress told DoD that the rule applies to companies on that 1260H list, the blacklist, but the class deviation seems to broaden the definition of a Chinese military company beyond that list. Could you talk about that prohibited sources list? How does it change contractors' compliance? And maybe what are some of the challenges that contractors might now face complying with the rule?
So the 1268 list has been around for several years now, and it's DoD's determination of companies that are associated with the Chinese government and the Chinese military that are operating in the United States. And I think what happened here is the rule, the DFARS class deviation, addresses multiple issues. And so there's one definition of Chinese military company, and it's used throughout that DFARS Part 240. And it goes beyond just the 1260H list. It also includes companies that are listed or non-specially designated nationals, which comes from the Department of the Treasury. It includes entities that are identified by the Commerce Department. And then we have a catch-all for any entity that's owned or controlled or affiliated with an element of the government or the military of China, or a subsidiary or affiliate of those entities. So that's a significant expansion. In terms of how this affects contractors, that's a little bit unclear, because with respect to Section 851, the representation that contractors have to make still refers elliptically back to the 1260H list only. So contractors have to represent that they do not do business with covered lobbyists, and a covered lobbyist is defined as someone who conducts lobbying activities on behalf of a company on the 1260H list. It does not appear to encompass the broader definition of Chinese military company. But again, that's a little bit of a gray area, and it's not entirely clear what the rule makers were intending here. So most contractors that I know are approaching this by getting representations by lobbyists or other people that they do business with, and asking those people or companies to certify that they are not covered lobbyists, they're not representing 1260H entities. And so what the DoD contractor has to do is essentially the same here: reach out, get these representations from people saying, I'm not a covered lobbyist. I think the potential for greater vetting is on the people who are being asked to make those representations. And does that go beyond just representing people on the 1260H list, or does it encompass these other categories that are in the DFARS?
We also have, the memo says that the ban does not apply to companies that made reasonable inquiries into lobbying activities. But I think neither the provision nor the class deviation actually mention anything beyond that. So what constitutes a reasonable inquiry?
That's a very good question. We don't know exactly what that means. And we have a reasonable inquiry, singular, is defined in the FAR. But this is a little bit of a different context. And so I don't think you can rely on the FAR definition here. I don't think it would make sense. Because it's not defined, it's going to be up to companies to determine what they think is reasonable. Most contractors who I've spoken to have decided that it's going to involve getting representations from people who might be covered lobbyists. It could also involve reviewing public disclosures from lobbying or the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Those could also be activities that one would consider to be reasonable inquiries. But it's not at all defined, as you said, and so the rulemakers haven't given us much to go on here.
Anything else that contractors should be aware of now that this class deviation is out?
I would say anytime contractors are making representations to the government, whether standalone or by virtue of submitting a proposal, that's creating False Claims Act risk. And we've seen a lot of emphasis over the last few years in scrutinizing contractors and the representations that they make to the government and using the False Claims Act to police that. And so this is one additional area that contractors need to be concerned about and make sure that they are complying when they are submitting their proposals and representing that they are compliant.
That's Tracye Howard, Government Contracts Partner at Wiley Rein, speaking with Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com.